Thank you, Chair. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I thank the member for Norwich North for organising this incredibly important debate and the many insightful and inspiring comments we have heard today. We have heard today that women and girls are disproportionately suffering the impacts of the global rising conflicts around the world, forcing record numbers of women and girls to flee their homes and dramatically increasing their vulnerability to sex trafficking, child marriage, and other forms of gender-based violence, and then are often marginalised and stigmatised by their communities. But conflict isn't impacting women through gender-based violence alone. It brings with them the loss of livelihoods, worsening healthcare, higher death rates, and undermines women's ability to give birth safely and interrupts access to essential supplies such as contraceptives. We've also seen brazen assaults on civilians, aid workers, and critical service delivery points, all of which constitute flagrant violations of international humanitarian law. Essential infrastructure like hospitals, displacement camps, and safe spaces have also been casualties of war, which has cut women and girls off from vital services and emergency assistance at a time when they are most at risk. As a result, conflict increases existing structural and gender inequalities and takes decades to undo. Time and again, it is women and girls who bear the brunt of the increasing number of armed conflicts globally. And the last year has been a devastating example of this. Let me only touch on the current crises in Sudan and Gaza. I will be brief because this has been covered so much already in this debate. In Gaza, nearly 70% of those killed in Gaza over a 6-month period were women and children. In itself, a terrible statistic, but even then, a disproportionately high level compared to usual conflicts. Pregnant women living through the conflict in Gaza are also 3 times more likely to miscarry, and if they do carry their babies to full term, they are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth due to a lack of access to medical care and nutrition. We also know that women and girls eat less and last in these conflicts, already plagued by malnutrition and starvation, although their nutritional needs are greater. And yet none of the UK's humanitarian funding for Gaza since October 2023 has been ring-fenced for women's needs or for women's rights and women-led organisations. This has to change. In Sudan, since the start of the conflict in April 2023, the number of people in need of sexual and reproductive health services has more than doubled, yet only 6.7% of the funding needed for gender-based violence prevention and response has been provided. Neither Palestine or Sudan have been included in the UK National Action Plan for Women, Peace and Security, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister in her response on why this is. We have heard from members today harrowing accounts of sexual violence in both Gaza and Sudan, and I will only make one note in addition to this, is that in Sudan we hear about women that have taken their own lives to escape rape by paramilitaries or because of being raped, or have experienced sexual violence in order to protect their children from being inflicted. This is the shocking nature of these conflicts. Through the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict strategy, the UK has been able to provide important support to survivors in Ukraine, providing expertise and material support to document sexual and gender-based violence, including through the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, but NGOs are unclear whether the lessons learned from that critical work are being applied to the conflicts we see in Sudan and Palestine. And so I would be grateful to receive confirmation from the Minister whether the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Groups have been dispatched to Sudan and Gaza, and if they're not, why not? I'd also like to hear from the Minister the government's plans to pick up on the commitments made by the previous government through the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative, so the UK can once again demonstrate global leadership on tackling sexual violence in conflict. Because when we consider how vulnerable and targeted women are in these conflicts, it not only offends our morals and consciences, but it makes, as honourable members have said, absolutely no rational sense either. In Gaza, for instance, women make up 70% of frontline health workers and 60% of caregivers. Women are important advocates, as we have heard, in conflict-torn places, and women are critical to build in lasting peace with strong evidence demonstrating that the involvement of women and girls in peace building is key to ending conflict and building long-term sustainable peace and stability. And I endorse my honourable friend from Tunbridge Wells' eminently sensible and practical suggestion to give women a seat at the table. Women must always have a seat at the table, and there are many women at these tables today. In 2021, only 0.2% of UK humanitarian ODA went to frontline women's rights organisations and movements. And so I asked the Minister to commit funding for women's rights organisation that is ring-fenced with humanitarian spending. As a signatory to the UN Security Council resolution on women, peace and security, the UK must lead on this issue. And the UK must be vocal, clear and more consistent in its support for international humanitarian law and in its condemnation of all violations and abuses against all civilians, including women and girls. My last point is one that I hope the Minister not just agrees with, but acts upon. As the member for North Herefordshire has pointed out, increasing international development funding is the fundamental way the UK government can be properly tackling the kind of gender-based inequality and sexual violence we've been discussing today. Because by prioritising development funding before a conflict breaks out and allowing programmes to tackle existing gender inequalities in peacetime is a far more effective way of tackling deep-rooted inequalities that women and girls often experience in these fragile states and can reduce some of the gendered impacts and violence when conflict breaks out. Because gender-based violence is not inevitable, rather, it is rooted in existing inequalities. But UK aid for programmes which included gender equality objectives nearly halved between 2019 and 2021, with a devastating impact on women and girls. Funding for programmes supporting women and girls desperately needs to be restored immediately, as does the Humanitarian Relief Reserve Fund and health programmes, which have also been cut. All of these programmes have been eroded in the years since UK ODA was cut from 0.7% of GNI to 0.58% by the previous government, but cut further to 0.5% in this government's budget. It is no secret that the Liberal Democrats are pushing hard for the return of 0.7% of GNI and remain perplexed why this government insists on adopting fiscal tests they so vigorously opposed as a shadow government. The point about the 0.7 is that it is proportionate to a country's prosperity. So will the government to commit to reviewing its use of fiscal tests and its declared goal to return to the 0.7%? I'd like to close with this. Women and girls generally do not start wars, nor do they usually have the power to end them, but they suffer disproportionately from them. But it is within our gift to empower them. Let us then commit to do that.